On the overflow?
No.
Okay, we're good.
We're good.
Very
But
good.
it's available.
Okay. So at this point, has everybody had a chance to hit this URL? Anybody not? Anybody having trouble still? All right, we're good. So I'm going to pull this down. Okay. So my name is John Yanarella. I'm a principal software architect with Universal Mind. Most of my work these days is actually with either native iOS or using the Sencha frameworks. But I've been, in the past, I've used jQuery Mobile on some of these projects as well. And I found it to be a really valuable framework to have in your tool set. There's no sort of one-size-fit-all web solution these days. But this is a really excellent framework for when you need to build content that's going to work on multiple devices, the myriad number of devices that we're dealing with these days. And you have maybe a small budget and you're working with fairly simple content that you need to present in a manner that would be accessible in a touch, interactive model, either on a phone or a tablet, and increasingly now on the desktop. So, as I point out here, we've all kind of had to deal with this fragmentation, both in terms of platforms, this explosion in the last 5 years of the number of platforms, browser versions, even among Android, various different flavors of WebKit, little bits of incompatibility here and there. It really blows out the amount of effort that's necessary to deliver what used to be a simple experience. You used to be able to write a web page and count on that basic content being accessible to most users as long as you stayed within sort of basic parameters. However, the interaction model there was very sort of mouse-oriented. The sort of buttons that you would create out of the base sort of HTML form, those don't work very well in a touch form factor. So another factor there is you're working on trying to deal with layouts. If you want to do a mobile site today, there's a whole slew of things you have to become aware of. You've got to learn media queries. You've got to deal with all these various gestures and interactions and models there. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a framework that distilled that down to a core that you could reuse? This is where jQuery Mobile comes in. So jQuery Mobile is a framework from the same group, same foundation there as same people associated with jQuery. And I wanted to have us go ahead and just get a sense of what it feels like, what it looks like, before we delve in and start trying to build some stuff on our own. So I've got 3 sites here. If you've got your phone or your iPad, this might be a good time to get yours out, and we'll take a look. The first one I wanted to show here is the Stanford University jQuery mobile app here. Let me make this a separate window here. You can tell I haven't been on Windows in a while. So as you can see, we're getting, well, the logo disappeared. We're getting a responsive design kind of out of the box from it. I'm not sure what's happening. Let's try the Walt Disney one. The Walt Disney one's probably a better example of that kind of scaling interactivity. So as I resize the browser, you can see that we've got an experience that's going to scale both from an iPad to an iPhone. If you're interacting with it on your phone, you'll see that all the buttons are about the right size for touch interaction. You'll see that you have that kind of list-based interaction model we've come to expect from iPhone, Android. This list drill down interaction. We've got a menu we can navigate here throughout. So we look at the Stanford website here. We'll give that another shot again. This looks very iPhone-like. If you're looking at it on your phone, it probably feels a little better than it does full screen. Open table. another nice example of jQuery. jQuery mobile. We can use the geolocation that's built into the browser, built into mobile browsers as well, and find relevant restaurants, book a reservation. All of these sites were built using jQuery mobile. So, what is jQuery mobile? It's about a 2-year-old framework. It runs on top of jQuery. I reference here that it's built on jQuery user interface. It's built on principles kind of founded in jQuery UI. It actually doesn't require, you don't have that as a dependency. You just need to include jQuery, you include the jQuery mobile library. It's going to be interesting that as we go through these exercises today, you're actually not going to write any JavaScript. Most of the interaction with jQuery mobile is sort of magic, and we'll get into that. It's pretty cool. But all of that magic rides on top of the abstractions that jQuery has built over all the inconsistencies within browsers and APIs. And then jQuery mobile is riding on top of that and leveraging that as well. Plus, having those two together, you can leverage your existing knowledge of JavaScript to script those elements and do sort of interactive elements that you need to with this UI set. It's open source, just like jQuery and jQuery UI. It's dual license, so it's available under MIT or GPL. Most of us are going to use it under the MIT. GPL obviously is the more restrictive license. It's hosted on GitHub. You can go there, you can look at the issue tracker, you can file issues, you can look at the source. Got the URL there if you want to follow through there. There's a lot of big names backing it and funding it and sponsoring it. Notice Adobe and BlackBerry and well, Palm's not around with us anymore in the same form, but Mozilla. So most of the lead development seems to be done these days by people at the Filament Group. It's a cross-device, cross-platform, cross-browser solution that's built on HTML5 and CSS3. So the core things that it uses from HTML5 are the data attributes, the custom data attributes. So normally an older browser experiences or sees an attribute there that it doesn't recognize, it ignores it. This is something that the HTML5 spec takes advantage of and formalizes and said, okay, well, for anything that starts with data and a dash, that can be something that you can use in your own application domain to add additional annotations or attributes to a DOM element. And we'll see this in action. The benefit of this is that there's a consistent, you're not going to end up using a name that later is going to be used by the spec itself. So it's a safe place for people to add framework-specific or domain-specific information. jQuery Mobile and jQuery make it very easy to consume that. So if you get a DOM element via selector, it's very easy to pull that data out. And the framework itself leverages that. jQuery Mobile is built extensively on the concept of progressive enhancement. So the idea is you start with the simplest and this base functionality you know will work on your basic smartphones, and you progressively enhance that experience through CSS and through JavaScript. So you actually, with jQuery Mobile, it will rewrite some of the DOM elements and add additional DOM elements and append styles that are relevant for the particular browser or mobile device that you have accessed the site from. Graceful degradation is obviously that in reverse. The idea is that the UIs that you build with jQuery Mobile should work on the simplest browser, but will be more enhanced and work well and look beautiful and have all the nice touch, gesture, interactivity on a more modern device. Now, there's obviously caveats to that. There is no silver bullet. No framework is going to do that magically and make IE6 great or IE8 great. But one of those, the core things that they've done is to ensure that at the very least, you get basic functional experiences on a very wide variety of platforms and devices. They have a nice table on their website that keeps you up to date in terms of, for all this slew of platforms and devices, what the grade level is of that experience. And it's this kind of A, B, C grade that you see here. With a grade A browser, you're going to get a full experience with animations and all that great stuff. When you go to load a new page, it's actually a seamless transition. It goes and uses Ajax to retrieve it instead of you seeing the page disappear, so you get this kind of seamless application experience. With B, you still get that. With C, you're down below that. Or sorry, with B, you don't get the Ajax, and with C, you get just sort of your standard web page look. Now, one thing that's interesting about jQuery Mobile is that they've gone for a unified user interface that's really sort of platform agnostic. If you've seen some of the other web frameworks like Sencha Touch, or there was a great presentation on Kendo UI, with those, they actually make it look like the native experience. But you kind of get this uncanny valley, which is this term that kind of came into vogue when there was that movie a few years ago, 3D1 with Tom Hanks, and the faces looked realistic enough, but just realistic enough to be creepy, And so with mobile, you have this UI, and it kind of feels like it looks like it's that, but it doesn't behave quite right. There's maybe a little bit of a judder, or it's not quite the right size, or it doesn't interact the same way as the native. So the standard theme in jQuery Mobile sidesteps that by saying, we're not going to pretend to be that. We're just going to be something that's really good for that kind of interaction. So what we have is a framework that enhances your standard HTML tags, your standard HTML forms, makes it into a touch optimized platform agnostic, but you can still theme it, you can still customize it and brand it further. But out of the box, it's going to look and feel the same across all these devices. It's not going to try to pretend to be native, but it'll be a good experience. In terms of the themable experience, much like jQuery, there's a theme roller. If you click that link, and we'll actually probably come back and do that later in this presentation, but this will allow you to go in and style just with a drag and drop interface. You can see a real-time preview of what the UI would look like. Via the color swatches, you can choose gradients. There's integration with Adobe Cooler or Color. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to pronounce that given the K. And then you have great accessibility to just download a zip of that theme and to share that theme with somebody else to say, hey, do you like this? They can tweak it, send it back. jQuery Mobile also has an understanding of touch and gestures. So it extends, your normal interaction there, your normal set of events that you might get from the DOM via jQuery to include tap and hold, and swipe. So you can detect when somebody swipes or taps. So we were talking about earlier, there's a navigation model there where you get that seamless experience. So you reference an external HTML file, it could actually it will automatically go and pull that file it'll make the Ajax call, take that text, inject that into the DOM, style it, and make the HTML again look like this native experience they're providing. As it does that, as you navigate through, it can also add the back button that we're used to seeing in that top panel and remove it as necessary. It builds a navigation stack. It's leveraging the HTML5 history API. And with that, there's a suite of animations you can apply. Another great thing about this is that you're going to get accessibility out of the box. When it rewrites your DOM elements, it adds the additional attributes that are necessary for screen readers. It's going to work immediately with VoiceOver. So it's a nice bit to get for free right out of the box. Now, when would you use jQuery Mobile? This is kind of a loaded question, but when you think about the spectrum of web experiences that we have out there, they range from just a flat, static document on up to more interactive experiences, all the way to full-fledged applications that look and feel an awful lot like desktop applications. Used to be, we did a lot of Flex and Flash over here on the application spectrum. Now we're seeing frameworks like Sencha kind of fill that gap. jQuery Mobile is probably not your solution for that end. It's probably good from the perspective of document to interactive. It will enhance basic form elements, but it doesn't give you a tree, it doesn't give you a grid. It's not going to give you those, it's not going to give you MVC. It's just a UI layer. If you want to build a more extravagant application there, you're going to need to apply another framework. And you're going to need to include something like Backbone or Knockout.js or Angular underneath there. And there are actually adapters for those frameworks to make them work with jQuery Mobile as the presentation tier.
Does mobile allow plugins like regular jQuery or extensions?
Well, it ultimately is a plugin in effect. So yeah, you can continue to write and extend that. And there are actually some great plugins there on their resources page. People have added things like date pickers. But yes, so your knowledge, in fact, of writing plugins or even just how to consume and use those plugins is going to translate to this experience. Because as again, it's jQuery, and then jQuery Mobile itself is a plugin. So how about we dive in and start using jQuery Mobile? What I've got here is an interactive code editor that you'll be able to type into, and you can hit preview, and you'll see a preview of jQuery Mobile running in an iframe there with whatever you have currently typed into the code editor. We're going to start simple. I guess first, go ahead and hit that preview. It's going to be pretty boring. But what do we have in the HTML already here? You'll see that we have a meta tag there to define the viewport. This is necessary to instruct devices like the iPhone that you really don't want it to pinch and zoom out of scale with the content that you're providing it here. You reference the style sheet there. That is the jQuery Mobile style sheet, the default theme. Then you reference jQuery. And then you reference jQuery Mobile's JavaScript file. So we're looking at 3 references there to external scripts, and we're good to go. Next we have the body, and within there we're defining a page. So we have a div there. It's currently I've given it an ID of page 1. We'll explore pages and navigation between pages a bit further in here. But right now you'll notice there's that data role attribute on that div. And this instructs jQuery Mobile as to how to treat that particular div, how to enhance that div. Within there, we've got a data role of content, so we've got page, content, and within that, let's go ahead and add a button. So there are 3 ways that you can represent that in HTML. The simplest way here is going to be, let's go ahead and use an anchor. We'll do a normal link. I'm just pulling up my cheat sheet there. So let's, first off, we'll add a normal link with no enhancement to it. So how about we're just going to go to an anchor on the same page so that we won't end up clicking this link accidentally and setting ourselves off.
You can make that larger.
Yeah, I probably could. I guess I didn't realize it was going to be that small on this screen. So let me switch a couple of things here. I'm going to have to. Oh, you know what I could do? Well, that's not a real editor. That's a simulation of an editor in JavaScript. So what I'm going to have to do is I would have to change the. What now? Will it? No kidding. Oh, of the whole. Yeah. I'm a little wary of changing the viewport on this. Let me just change the style on it. That may not have worked as well as I thought. Yeah, I guess I'll give that other approach a shot there. Okay. Is that a bit more readable for you? Okay, thank you. Very good. Okay, so within here, oh, and I get a nice little, how about that? How cool is that?
Bigger.
Okay, so maybe I shouldn't be so snobbish about my Mac, huh? So we'll create a link here. And let's go ahead and preview that. And right now, it just looks like a link, right? And what if we wanted that to look a little better? Something that somebody could click on and interact with a little better in a mobile device. Well, let's give that a data role and set that to button. So it's going to be data role button. And hit preview. And
date role.
Did I put date role? That would be why it didn't work. Thank you. Okay, so now we have a nice looking button, data role button. Now there are obviously other ways we can represent a button as well. Let's see, is everybody caught up to there? Looks like we've got a couple people still. Another route for doing a button is just to do a simple button tag, right? And a third way that we could do that would be an input type equal button. Sorry, submit rather. We'll see all three of these give us nice looking styled buttons. Additionally, we can give some of these emphasis. There's a concept of themes within jQuery Mobile, and those themes are referenced A, B, C, D, and E. And so for those, we can go data theme. Actually, we'll do B on this. You'll see that that one gets a different color. There's actually a different color scheme associated with each theme. And go to C, we'll get another theme. Most of those are the same for. So, right out of the box, we're already starting to see that we get this drastic change from HTML we already know. How is that happening? If we go in here, we right-click and we inspect, we start to see how that magic works. So we can see that this looks a bit different than what we typed in, right? We had a ahref, but now we've got a bunch of new data attributes that have been appended, which jQuery Mobile did, and some additional classes that have been appended, and these all reference CSS that was defined in that CSS file we included. The framework has essentially rewritten your code to give it that appearance, and that rewriting that occurs there is going to be different on different devices. So if you go with an IE device, come in with IE, it's actually going to end up rewriting that DOM slightly different to accommodate for some of the things that differ between those browsers. From your perspective, you do the simplest thing that you could do to represent that idea, and the framework makes it look the way you'd like it to look. So let's step that up a bit and say, well, what about some icons there? So within here, let's add another button there. And we're going to start using, there's another data attribute there, which is called data icon. There are a series of built-in icons that are included within jQuery Mobile that we can reference. So normally I don't break it across multiple lines, but this code editor likes to do that apparently. So I'm going to pull that back up. So let's add a button here. We'll call this search, and we'll give it a data icon attribute, and we'll give that search as the content. And if you give that a preview, you'll see a nice looking icon that has a search magnifying glass there. If you want to play with a few more, some of the ones that are out of the box are refresh. There's a check, gives you a nice checkbox. Got a little check mark, delete, a plus. Now, I imagine you're thinking, well, I don't always want the icon to show there to the left. I want a little bit of control over that. Often we see those icons above the button or to the right or below it. And for that, there are additional attributes. There's data position, top. Sorry, data icon pause. Position. Sorry, yeah, that was wrong. Data icon pause. Nice little abbreviation there. And that will place the icon at the top. Obviously, you have bottom, left, and right as well that you can do. We do this, we can see that the icon now appears different location. Obviously, we started with left. Left is clearly the default. Here's on the right. The other thing we might want to do is maybe we don't want our buttons to span the entire width of the page, particularly when you get an iPad. That's probably not what you want. So at that point, we'll want to leverage another option there, which would be the data inline attribute. And so this tells it to create an inline button. The styling is different of this on these so that they only take up the width of the word itself. Seeing a lot of squinting. Should I make this a bit bigger?
Yeah, the problem is you've still got the one page up front, so it's covering up what you're doing in the back.
Let's see what you're doing.
See? It's bigger and behind the page, but you've got the old page still up front.
Okay.
I don't know how you get rid of it. You obviously don't see it.
Magnify, you can make it bigger.
Okay. Would that help? Okay, very good. Appreciate the feedback there. It's a little disorienting on my side here. I feel like I moved the mouse and it's... Okay, so is that a little better than for the back? Okay, good. Wouldn't want you to have a headache after 2 hours of squinting. So here we've introduced the data inline attribute, which will now give us buttons that are quite a bit smaller. One consequence of this now is I can't reach the preview button.
I know yesterday when they dimmed the lights a little bit in the room, like the bottom, it helped quite a bit.
Oh, would that be possible?
You control minus and still have the zoom there. Because the zoom.
Oh, good call. Good call. Yeah, I'm like creative people here. Very good. Problem solvers. Excellent. Okay.
That better?
Better in the back? Okay. So additionally, we've already touched on the data theme. Another attribute you can do is data mini, and this will create a smaller button.
Can you data themes like at a broader level?
Yes. So the data themes you can actually apply to the containers themselves, to the pages. As we delve through all of these, all of the elements are themable in that manner. And as we dive back into Theme Roller, you'll actually see previews of each of the different themes of all of the sets.
and you can come in and color those differently.
What is that data mini actually?
The data mini is responsible for making the smaller
Yeah, I
versions
just
of
turned my
those.
search button into seer ...
Oh, no kidding. Well, that would be a bug because it should still keep the same width.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you change the drop-down menu to like inline problem so forth, is it supposed to populate it with something, or it always starts with a blank?
So yeah, there are two sections here. You'll notice there's exercises and solutions. The exercises will come in sort of not populated. The solutions will have it populated. So, no, actually, I type really fast. Another thing that we'll commonly want to do is to group a bunch of buttons together. This is another feature. So now we're adding a div around those buttons. We give it a data role of control group. And optionally, we can specify this data type of horizontal. And this will allow us to show those buttons as groups. You'll see that they kind of lose their previous distinctness, and you have rounded edges on the sides of each of those, but straight edges between them. This will give that perception to a user that those are all related. So everybody bored with buttons? Let's move on to some more. Never. Yeah, good answer. We'll move on to a little more interesting thing, which would be the form elements that are available within jQuery UI. So we'll start off first with adding we've got the div content area there. We're just going to add, right now, a placeholder form element. Normally, you would have some sort of action associated with this and a URL where you're going to post that form. Or you might be attaching some JavaScript to take the submission of that form and do some work. But here we'll just go with a simple form element. Next, we're going to want to add a label for and a standard text input. And alternatively, you might want to copy and paste that text input and also include a type of password so you can get a sense of how the password field would look. So is everybody to that point? Once you hit preview there, you're going to see that even the text input has been stylized and given a bit more of a touch-sensitive sizing and a nicer appearance, consistent appearance. Similarly, we could do the same thing with a text area. Absolutely.
I don't have iOS, so I don't know how it works, but on Android, when you type in a password, it gives you the character you typed in.
Right.
Before you type it in, it's just doing the same thing, because it isn't doing it on Windows.
On Windows, yeah. The simulation, obviously, you're not getting that same experience, so that's going to end up having the experience of a native
So
text input. So not so much like native as in like the if you were writing it in Java, but like if it was a text input in a browser, I mean, it's still an input text or input type password, so it's going to have that same behavior. That hasn't been overridden. And the text area is, if you've gone ahead and moved on that, you'll see that that is a resizable text area. It will grow as you type.
Question.
Sure.
Basic question. For all this formatting to happen, do you need the data role content on the parent div? Is that what?
Actually, well, that's a good question. We probably could just experiment and find out the answer. As to whether or not you have to have that, I don't think that they're that picky on it, but it's no longer a content area. It's not going to have the borders here that you would normally have gotten. So the question
doesn't just go native to form or label.
Right. So this is an interesting question. So he's asking if you omit the data, or if you omit the data role around some of the other things, is it going to still style this? So yes, it will. It'll still style the element that's been annotated, but you notice that here, now that I've removed my content area around it, I've lost the nice padding and border that it was living in. The component itself is still the same. You can override and still get the native component. So there are times where you really want jQuery not to rewrite your component, and you can do that. You can tell it not to enhance that element. And if you're quizzing me on what that is right this second, I can't remember what it is. It's another data attribute.
I'm not sure why you want to, but I'm just curious as to how it works.
Okay. Were there any other questions? Okay. So another nice thing that's included is support for the new input type search. So it will automatically give that a nice search icon. And it will take advantage of the placeholder attribute. Here we go. And we're going to see that search component come up again once we get to lists. Some really cool stuff that is baked into its support for being able to do native searching and filtering of lists. We're all pretty familiar with the on-off switch on iOS and Android. This input type of range will automatically be converted actually to I'm sorry, I picked the wrong one. I meant to pick the flip toggle. So for the flip toggle one, we can do a data role of slider on a select, and we'll get that same kind of flip switch, power switch that we're used to from iOS and Android. Is everybody caught up? Okay. The slider is significantly enhanced, as you can see. So here we just have an input type of range between 0 and 50. But what we get as the result is a slider that also has a numeric text input that will enforce those values and provide up and down arrows.
Is there an increment field for that? Because I just bumped mine up to 1,000 and incremented by 10. Just
I suspect that the input type range probably has that as an attribute, and then it would respect that. Honestly, your experience, your mileage is going to be Your mileage may vary on that when you come to use that on a device that doesn't understand those attributes of the newer HTML5 inputs. Okay, cool. Radio buttons, let's take a look at those. So for radio buttons, we're actually going to introduce another bit of tag here, a field set. A field set will allow us to group a number of controls together and to give them a label, which would be this legend. And as you're slowly discovering, if you know HTML, you already know jQuery mobile pretty much. You're just going to do your standard input type radio for each of the radio elements that you'd like to have within this group. And you get a very nice, stylized, touchable UI for that. Likewise with checkboxes. We have here another field set within a div that's marked field contain. The benefit of that field contain is that it tells jQuery Mobile that it should expect a field set and a legend and style it in such a way that on a as you see it here on the iPhone simulation that's occurring in here, the label's going to be above and the field's going to be here. As you expand out and look at it on an iPad, the label will be off to the side and the field will be here. So it'll automatically do sort of a responsive layout of that to take advantage of the increased width. And so your fields will be here. Obviously, you can explicitly tell it where it should put those fields, and you can override these things via CSS and enhance it further if you need to brand it or change it. But out of the box, you get a lot of standard conventional behavior for free. So again, with our checkboxes, this is pretty familiar territory. This looks an awful lot like our radio buttons of a few moments ago, but now we can select multiple items. And no tour through all of the standard HTML form elements would be complete without looking at a select. So here we have a select with 4 options. This will again be given a stylized and touch-friendly interaction. Now, as we see it here in the browser, we're getting what's the native experience here in Chrome. On iOS, you're going to see a standard select interaction there, though the bottom half of it will become that dial that you can pick amongst. So it's going to, in this case, fall back to whatever's native to that device for rendering that select area. So that covers the basic form elements. Does anybody have any questions so far? Absolutely.
Is there built-in validation, or do you have to add it on top of this?
That, I think, is outside the realm of jQuery Mobile. So you're going to end up needing to apply either your own plugin to do additional sort of stylization of that and validation of those elements. It's going to be just like your existing, if you've done jQuery-based apps, you're going to do it pretty much the same way. This is really, that actually is a good demarcation there between what jQuery Mobile does and what it doesn't. It's just this sort of veneer, this presentation tier, this rewriting of the HTML to make it look and feel appropriate on mobile devices. Everything else you've got to bring to the table yourself. So when we were talking earlier about that spectrum, if you start getting into richer applications where you need to do data validation, send that back to the server, or do data binding and show live updates to stuff as it comes in, you're going to have to bring the frameworks that you've already been using for standard web to that. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. So let's move on to lists. So lists are pretty exciting in jQuery Mobile. See if I can get back to the top of this. Okay. So with jQuery Mobile, we can simply do a standard unordered list. We'll add some list items to it. Now, if we preview this, obviously we're getting a normal bulleted list. But again, through the data role, double check that, yeah, okay. Data role of list view, we'll suddenly get an experience that's quite a bit different. We'll get that kind of list view that we've gotten used to interacting with for picking items in iOS and Android. Oftentimes we want to be able to navigate from an element within there, we'll want to show a disclosure icon to say we want to go further. And those will automatically happen if we add an anchor tag within there. So you see for this element now, we have a nice little disclosure there. If we click that, it's going to follow that link. As we delve into pages, we'll discover how we can actually make that link to another page and pull in that content. If we want to enhance that a little further, we can actually nest lists. And for this one, you probably want to just jump down and use the solution, because there's a little bit of a tweak that I had to do at the top to get the back button going. We'll talk about that in a second. Plus, I don't think you really want to type multi-levels of lists and ordered lists here just to get a sense of this. So here we have a list view, data rolled unordered list that within it has list elements that themselves have unordered lists with list items. So here we have a hierarchy of Apple iPhone, Google Nexus, and Samsung, and individual model numbers underneath. When we hit preview, you'll see that I can actually drill into these. Now, when we go into the navigation between pages later, the framework will automatically add the back button for you. Unfortunately, with the lists that are done this way, where you're doing it nested and relying on the framework to give you this behavior, you're going to have to add those buttons yourself, which this little bit of jQuery up here does. So when this page is created, I've added a live listener for that will look for those elements and add that back button. This is sort of not something you would normally have to do. Normally, you're going to end up probably not rendering out that nested list. I think there was a bug filed on this, and they were discussing how they didn't think most people actually used it in this manner. Normally, you would have a page that you rendered where you would have that first tier of listed items, and each of those would have a link that we would then go to another page that was relevant for those list items and have that. But in the event that you ever want to do this sort of model where you have a nested list and want it to kind of automatically give you the back button, there's a little bit of reference code for that that's not part of the docs. So for a numbered list, obviously we just change over to an ordered list. And we're going to get numeric indicators next to them. So where previously we had a UL for unordered list, now with an OL for an ordered list, we'll get a nice ordered list. Something we're used to seeing these days are little counts off to the side. So we'll see that there's 5 items or 5 little badges that indicate how many items are in there. There's a nice style that's built into jQuery Mobile that will support that. So here we have just a span wrapping the number. And we give it this unordered list item count class around it. And that'll give us a nice little bubble for each row as to that value. Again, yeah.
I just looked at the style sheet for this, and it's humongous. Is there documentation on it somewhere, just so you know what all these class names are?
I haven't found great documentation on the style sheet itself, and I've actually been burned trying to rely on elements actually being in the same level. Like I was saying, with IE, it'll render the elements in a different way. At the time that I tried, I didn't find good docs on that, but they do have some pretty fantastic docs overall that are actually done in jQuery Mobile itself. And I've got a link to that in the resources section at the very end of the slides. So that might be a good place to look there. but yeah, you're kind of going to have to just put the code in and kind of inspect it to see. That is one of the things you'll find frustrating if you do use their documentation. Most of their examples are the live rendered HTML rather than the stuff that was used to originate that. So you go to a view source and you're going to see all the stuff that jQuery Mobile added instead of where did they start. You have to actually go to their Git repository and look at the docs themselves and the original HTML files. So, wish I had a better answer for you. Sorry. Any other questions have come up?
So let me make sure I answer. The title tags controlling the list type.
What's this now?
Basic list, numbered list, nested list. The title tag is what controls the list type.
I still didn't follow for some reason. I'm sorry. I'm sure it's my fault.
You know, you get.
The UL versus an OL.
Oh, the ordered list versus the unordered list? Yeah. So, yeah, a UL versus an OL. So again, we're just taking standard. So if we took off that data role and we looked at this right now with this UL, we'll see those are bulleted. If we went with an OL, this is just standard HTML. That's an ordered list, so we get numbered bullets. Is that what you were looking for? Okay. Well.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, no problem. So another common pattern we see within the UI on most of these devices are these list dividers, these dividers that appear within the list to demarcate sections. And these can be achieved using a list item that has a special data role of list divider. So you can see we've just expanded this a little bit further. We have an unordered list that now we've added 3 list dividers. But that's going to get tedious if we're working with maybe a data set that we want to have showing a bunch of names. Let's say like the address book on your iPhone, and you go through it, you can see that it's got A, B, C kind of demarcation, so you can quickly navigate to those. In jQuery Mobile 1.2, they've added auto dividers. So if you pull up your auto dividers exercise here, look at it right now. I've got a list of all the speakers at NCDevCon. Got a standard, just a standard unordered list with a bunch of list items. All we need to do is add another attribute there. And I'm going to have to go to my cheat sheet. I know that the value for it is auto divider, but the data role on it, or the data, yeah, it's data auto divider equal true.
It's dividers.
Is it dividers plural? Thank you very much.
I'm just using your cheat sheet.
Fantastic.
You gotta have it.
You gotta have them. Gotta have them. And I need to have the same kind of quote on both sides if I want it to work.
I made true instead of true.
There we go. So now we see the introduction automatically by the framework. Now this is a little bit flawed in that we probably wanted these by last name, but in order to achieve that, we would have had to have started maybe last name, comma first. But you can see the benefit there of you know, that out-of-the-box behavior being something that, you know, it's conventional, it's something we need on mobile devices, and it's trivial to add to very basic HTML. Taking that a little further, one of the more exciting things, let's look at the search filter bar. So here we have a list view, and that list view has a number of list items within it. If we look at the list, we see there's just a standard list. What if we wanted to kind of search for a specific item in there? What if we wanted that kind of search field that shows at the top? To do that, we simply add a data filter equal true, and we get some really cool behavior. We have a filter button at the top now, and as we type in it, right out of the box, we get filtered. That's a pretty cool feature to get for free. So another thing I wanted to show, this is actually not really limited just to lists. There's another sort of container that you can apply that gives you collapsible behavior. And so we'll do it to a group of lists, though, to demonstrate it. So here we're going to add a data role of collapsible list view. Sorry, collapsible. Let's add that to each of these divs. So we're looking for each of these divs above the headings, and we'll add a collapsible. And the behavior we get now is a nice little collapsible section. And you can actually, well, you'll see in a moment, you can put form elements within these lists. And so as you build these layers on top of each other, you start to get a pretty rich UI that you can provide. You could have a bunch of control elements that are in here, like on-off switches that would only show when this particular section is expanded. So this allows you to condense a lot of touch-sensitive UI into a smaller area. You could also do an accordion by grouping all of these within a collapsible set. So if we were to add another div, the data role, I believe it's that. So at the very beginning of that, then I'll put the closing div at the end of these. So if we enclosed all of these three divs that were collapsible in a collapsible set, they're now grouped together, and only one is open at a time. So we've got an accordion. Everybody with me? Okay. This one, let's choose the lists with form elements. Now initially we have a standard form. Forms can be embedded within lists. So I can do an unordered list with a data role, list view. That should be a lowercase l. My apologies. We'll go ahead and put that closing tag here at the end so we don't forget it. And if we give each of these, embed each of these in a list item, so you'll see that this is basically all of the form items that we covered previously. We've got checkboxes, list boxes, input, checkboxes, combo boxes, inputs, password inputs, text areas, etc. And all of those can be children of a list. And so they gain a bit more of a border around them, and they can participate in things like the collapsible behavior we saw before. So you can imagine how you could pretty quickly build something like, say, the settings app on your iPhone, where you have these sort of headings and then pick within there, and then you've got a bunch of form elements related to that particular setting. So all of these things kind of layer and stack on top of each other, these little bits of progressive enhancement. So that covers form elements. You can see that there are some gaps there compared to things like Sencha Touch. There's no tree, there's no sort of drag and drop out of the box, anything like that. This is just sort of those conventional things that you're going to do. You do have kind of a lowest common denominator experience here, in that we're trying to reach smartphones, iPad, iPhone, desktop. You may, for certain applications, this may not be the right fit, but for many, I'm sure you're starting to see how standard HTML emitted from either a server-side or client-side template can be very quickly turned into a rich and interactive mobile experience. The next big topic, though, is how do we start to stitch that together into a larger application?
John?
Yeah.
It's at 10 o'clock if you want to take a break.
Yeah, that would be, if anybody wants to. I think we're cooking pretty fast through this. I think we only have 2 more sections of hands-on activities, and then at that point, I think I really kind of open up the floor to any questions anybody has or anything that anybody wants to kind of work on together. But yeah, let's take a break here. That's fine. Let's take a break here, and we'll be back after about 5 minutes.
What's the footprint?
It's pretty small, given that it's optimized for that. I don't know the file size off the top of my head, but I remember being pretty impressed. Part of why they're able to do that is they're unapologetic in i.e. maybe having square corners and that sort of thing. So they're using CSS3 wherever possible, rather than lots of images. And so it's obviously optimized for mobile experience, particularly given that they're another target for it is smartphones. They want it to work in environments where you don't have a lot of very fast data connectivity, and on devices that don't have even the richness of this on LTE.
What's the latest and greatest way of detecting someone comes from a multiple device over and whatever your site is?
I don't know. I'll punt on that question, because obviously you can use media queries to detect some of that from a CSS perspective, but that's not going to help you for what you were trying to describe. So he's asking, how do you detect these days? And obviously there are JavaScript libraries for detecting capabilities. I've seen some other people that have been using approaches where they try to detect it off the user agent. That can be a little flawed, like the iPhone 5 shows up as the same thing as an iPhone 4.
I also noticed when I'm like on a big tablet or something, I actually want the regular website,
Right.
And sometimes the forces make me send it to the mobile, whether I want it or not.
I find the same thing, and there's actually been there have been studies that have been showing that people really want the full web experience. And that has more to do, I think, with when people do the 2 versions of the sites. Do something like this where they use it, that they detect the browser and say, okay, we make a jQuery mobile site and deliver people there, like Expedia does this. But to go to that, or they can go on a desktop and send them to a full kind of desktop experience. And so for that, I find I always click through to the native thing because it's missing things. So the key thing is, if you're going to do an experience like this that you're optimizing towards mobile, you can't leave out features. You've got to include the core set of features that users are going to come to you and want. What is when it's mobile, there's obviously some context there. Like, I'm going to go to Expedia. There are specific things I want to know. I want my itinerary. I want to know my flight schedule, that sort of thing. You can bring that up front here. But, there's been a lot of talk lately about how people actually tend to go to the full site.
I can't figure on a small screen, I wouldn't want anything to but
right.
The 10-inch tablet, that's definitely capable of showing the whole site with everything.
Did you go to the Kendo UI one?
No.
Okay, the Kendo UI one, they've got a new mobile framework as part of what they're doing, and it looks an awful lot like this. Like, even some of one of the nice things is they're somewhat compatible I mean, at first I was like, wow, they just copied it. But no, it's actually cool that they're using the same data, like data role equal list view. Works on theirs too. And with the Kendo UI, they actually include a split view control there, which isn't something that's included as part of this. And that allows you to make tablet UIs that are a bit more like, okay, I've got a list view and a detail view kind of interactivity. But I agree with you. I think that in my experience, when I'm on my iPad, it drives me nuts when I go to a site and I get the jQuery mobile version.
No way you can get through.
Well, usually there's a link at the bottom, or at least if you're going to write one, make sure you put a link at the bottom. I don't know.
What's your opinion on Kendo UI?
The first time I used Kendo UI was January of this year, only just the Kendo UI, not the mobile stuff. And I was trying to graft that on top of Angular, and at the time I was finding that it wasn't quite what I was looking for. But they have radically rewritten it since then. They've done a model view model implementation that's really cool. And then the Kendo UI, I was impressed with what I was seeing there in the session, in that this same sort of structure that you're doing here, standard HTML decorated with these data roles, was enhanced to look very much like an Android experience, very much like an iOS one. But you hit a wall, because you're gonna get far enough along, and then you're gonna find there isn't the component you need that actually looks like the native one, and you've got to kind of create it and style it, go through, and then you got to do that for every one of those. I think that it's promising, but I'm not sold on it, except for in a case where I need just that limited set that they have, and that's pretty rare.
I was kind of impressed with how fast he created something that, oh man, that looks like
a native app.
That looks exactly like you would see on a phone.
Yeah.
I see that's where jQuery really doesn't have that, but again, it's not really what you're looking for.
Right. And there are themes that people have been, like there's an iOS theme that somebody built. So we were talking kind of the philosophy of jQuery Mobile at the beginning of this thing, which was that, okay, we're going to make this platform agnostic UI rather than trying to deal with the uncanny valley. But there are people who have built themes, like, in fact, BlackBerry just, as part of their next effort to try to woo developers, has introduced a theme for specifically to their devices that is jQuery Mobile, but with their theme. And there's a nice iOS one. So it can be styled to do that, but obviously it takes somebody doing that, and then it isn't coming from the core group that's doing it. So is it going to keep going? Like, I don't know that I would choose to do that on a project, because just because one guy did a theme a year ago, when jQuery Mobile 1.5 comes out, I've set my customer down a path where are they going to get the maintenance on that? Somebody's going to have to go and update that theme since it isn't part of the official build. The jQuery, the Kendo was better in that regard.
On the flip side, because I looked at EXT.js when I first got into this, and what made me go with just pure jQuery was I couldn't do it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I was stuck in what they thought was right.
I might disagree with you a little bit on that. Well, okay, yeah.
It was so limited. It was so, to get what you were talking about,
right?
You have to stick with what they want.
Yeah.
And where jQuery gave me everything, I could write my own stuff if I did if I wanted to.
Sure.
I have to be honest with you, I went with this, like I said, several years ago. The response, from the group and from what I've done and from what I've been able to do, and every time I need support, bang, it's there.
Yeah, they're very good on their yeah. I filed a couple issues and been impressed at how fast they come back. I mean, it's a good solution for that particular set of problems. I think we think about that spectrum again, and if you're trying to build something that's more like a native app, and you've got to do sophisticated charting and drill down kind of things, the EXT thing is such a touch is intriguing, particularly because like you look at the jQuery plugin model. Usually it's a method closure with a bunch of methods and stuff in there. So how do you enhance one that somebody else wrote? Yeah. Whereas with the Sencha-based ones, It's actually using that kind of object-oriented. So the Sencha stuff is really very classic desktop. Here's an object model for this component that's extensible. But that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of expense. Whereas this is, if you need to be up and running really quick. So the answer, like we were said at the very, very beginning, was there is no silver bullet. It's going to vary from project to project. And I can imagine how successful it's been in your experience there.
Very successful.
Because it allows you to focus on the problem, the custom problem, the customer's problem, rather than on building a framework to simulate all this stuff. You don't have to deal with that. And that's a good thing, especially in these times of change. New frameworks coming out every week practically. It seems like RevVC and VM and all that fun stuff. So I think looks like most everybody's back. Everybody ready to dive back in and look at pages and navigation and how that whole flow works? So far we've already seen what a single page looks like. All the applications, all of the sort of sample exercises we've done so far are single page. We have a content area, and in this case I've introduced a header, and we'll cover headers and footers in a bit more detail here in a minute. But we'll look here. We have a data role equal header on a div that's a child of a page, and then we have content within there. We look at this one, we can see we've got a nice little title bar here, and our content's going to flow and be nicely padded and presented within this area. If we want to have more than one page, you can actually define multiple pages within a single HTML file. So we'll start there. That's sort of the simplest case. So I'm just going to clone this, and I've got a page 2. I can have label these so I can tell which one is which. And here I'm actually going to go ahead and add a link. So link to href equal pound page 2. So we're using these kind of relative anchors, which jQuery Mobile understands under the hood it needs to treat differently. I'm pretty sure I have to set a data role on that. Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah. So here I've got 2 pages defined. This will look an awful lot like if people in the room have done some of the previous incarnations of attempts to make web work on mobile. There used to be WML, where you would define different cards. And you can kind of think of this as the same sort of approach. You have different pages, so you have a div that is a card within the UI, a page within the UI. So in this case, I'm going to reference this page by its ID. When I click that, you'll see after the flash, now I'm on page 2. Now, what would be nice is if there was a little better transition there, and there are a number of transitions that ship with jQuery Mobile. There's probably the one we're most interested in seeing here with the sliding animation. This looks a little bit, what did I do? I misspelled transition. This looks a little bit more like we're used to seeing. And if I want to go back within the header, I can add additional buttons. We'll cover that here in greater detail here, but I'm going to go ahead and add a back button here. So I'm going to reference page 1. I'm going to give it a data icon, a back. I'm going to label it. And there are some features you can turn on and off to have it automatically add those back buttons for you as it does the navigation stack. By default, it's off. But here I've just manually created my own back button, which will take me back. You can see the transition is associated with the link, so I didn't get the slide that time.
I could change and do a totally different animation if I wanted. So that's sort of the simplest scenario. The next scenario we can't really do in the context of this single page editor. But if I were to reference an external file there that had the same content as this page. So if we imagined this page like so, and we had another page that was just like it in another file called page2.html. All we would do is say page2.html. Now, on browsers this is that progressive enhancement, graceful degradation thing. On browsers that don't support that are in that category of B or C, that don't support the Ajax-based navigation, that's just going to be a normal link. You're going to click that, browser's going to flash, it's going to come back up, it's going to render that page. But in a browser that's in that A category, it's actually jQuery Mobile is going to see that link, capture that interaction, make a AJAX request, retrieve the HTML page as text, inject it into the DOM as if you had done the page there manually, like we did a second ago, and then do the transition to it. In order to get the nice transitions between pages, you have to have the AJAX capability, because you have to keep within the same page to do that animation. So that's, again, a feature that's only going to be available for those A-class browsers. But you can see how you would start to build your app. You could have individual pages with individual responsibilities. You could use ColdFusion or JSP or any of those things to render this simple HTML and get a data-driven kind of view there that took in query parameters on that URL that you linked to. So your list could have links to a page that accepted an ID and then showed all the children of that in another list as something that you link to, that kind of thing. So that's how you stitch together this into experiences that are sort of card and page based.
What's the advantages and disadvantages using multi-page versus single-page?
Probably HTTP requests. Like if you've got a bunch of lean pages, if your experience is probably this long, you're avoiding the user having to go and make an HTTP request, which in the context of a mobile device sitting on a poor network connection, you're actually going to get a better experience. But on the other hand, there's a lot of upfront costs with that. So you got to weigh it, I think, depending on, I could see scenarios where, and actually as we delve into pop-ups, you'll see situations where obviously you want that to come with, or dialogues, you want that to come with the initial page.
Seems like it could be potentially faster on one page, but it could get kind of unwieldy.
Yeah, I think once you hit a certain number of lines, you've lost the capability for multiple developers to work on it effectively. You've got a maintenance kind of like nobody wants any kind of code that's a billion lines long to deal with. It's not a scalable solution. So this next section, we're looking at toolbars. Oh, absolutely.
On the views.
Yeah.
On the pages. So there's no real notion of like a split view type setup that you can.
Not that I've found. Now, I say that, and yet they do that in their docs, but I haven't dug in to see how they do that. It's not a component they call out and explicitly provide. Kendo UI does. They have that explicitly. Yeah.
That seems like the
Yep.
with these frameworks, it's interesting to see how they're approaching it, especially with tablet. So resizing.
Yeah, I mean, jQuery Mobile, clearly a lot of the thought that went into it was before the iPad was really a target. Yeah. And I don't feel as if they've caught up to it. Kendo UI is interesting in that they're really new. I mean, that Kendo UI mobile thing, I think, must have been in the last few months, because I don't remember seeing it in January when I was evaluating the product. And they seem to be taking tablet into account from the beginning. So, any other questions? Cool. So toolbars, we just saw the header. Now, one of the things you can do with those headers is you can add buttons. Those buttons, you can have one on the left or the right, and their decision, like where they are presented, is driven either by where they occurred within the HTML if you had both, or you can explicitly specify a class to override that and tell it, okay, I want that to appear on the right. So here we have a page title. We're doing a button just like we did at the very, very beginning. We're giving it an icon. And you'll see that it's given a nice stylized color and shape that feels appropriate in that header. Footer, we can do the same thing. We can put buttons down there. These feel a little awkward. This doesn't look quite like what we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing larger sort of square buttons with nice icons within them. To achieve that effect, we actually use a nav bar, which we'll cover in a second. One thing I do want to point out here is the addition of the data position fixed that I've added on both the header and footer. If you don't add that, the header and footer are going to scroll with the content, which sometimes you want. But many times you want kind of a content area that stays fixed. This is one of the newer features. I don't think jQuery Mobile 1.0 didn't have this, but now on 1.1 they added it. 1.2 has it. You've got these fixed headers that now the content area stays the same, and doing it is as simple as adding an attribute.
Question.
Yeah.
And how do you get your own icons?
So that's something that I think they could do a little better, but ultimately you end up adding your own class to this. So you have your through CSS. You could count on the fact that it's going to be a UI-icon. They're going to add to it, and then you end up adding your own selector off of that that's going to match and use your own PNG. You're probably going to have a sprite sheet. Like they're using a single sprite sheet for all of theirs that's really lean, like very few colors. But yeah, if you want your own custom icons, unfortunately, you've got to put together your own image, sprite sheets, and CSS, and then reference those classes here. You can count on, I think, the question earlier, which CSS things can you select on. I mean, that's one that's actually documented. They have a nice example, actually, on their site of how to reference that particular and override that particular style. His question was, so how do I do custom icons? I don't know if everybody heard. So the nav bar, and now that you asked that, I probably should have jumped to this one. I'm doing that. So here I have a button. I'm using the glyphish icon set, and I've defined some custom styles off of that. I tell it I want a data icon of custom, and you can see up here at the top I have a CSS declaration, and you can see this one actually the solutions nav bar on your machine there. For UI button, glyphish, UI icon, so I'm doing a little overriding to give it kind of the look and feel I want. I want it to have a certain amount of padding and size and width. But the biggest thing is that for any of those that are UI button, glyphish, and a particular name, I'm going to use a particular element, a particular PNG. So in this case, we've got a nice app. I'm not really sure what app this would involve, but maybe some of the people here at the conference have experienced this particular path yesterday to today. So maybe this will be a hot seller in the App Store. I don't know. So what we have here is a data role of navbar around an unordered list, and I'm showing one within the content area and one within the footer. They're obviously rendered a bit different. Here it's going to be inset and part of the content area. Here it becomes essentially the nav bar. And this is the kind of lower bar experience we've gotten used to seeing in most apps. One of the interesting things about nav bars is that they kind of expand to fill that and divide the space evenly. If there's not enough space, it's actually going to overflow into the next row. So that's one thing you'll run into as you deal with devices with different widths. Any questions on toolbars and nav bars? Again, they're all just building on buttons, so any kind of link will work. Yeah?
I guess just back to the style sheet question.
Sure.
Again. So I see there's only one, and it's minute 5. So are the themes taken out in a separate style sheet, can you modify them, or would you just add another one to create your own theme? How would you?
So I guess there are a couple approaches you could take there. So it really depends on whether or not you're theming it. To use their nomenclature, theming is simply just applying a set of colors to it. But if you need to take it a step further and add like gradients and change some of the corners and add logos and other things, that's going to be in your own CSS file, in addition to probably either the default or a theme that you start from. So if we were to look at the theme roller, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump back to there. If you look at the theme roller, we can see here, we were talking before about how you could have different data themes. Here's A, B, C. You can add additional ones, D, E, however many you needed. And here you drag and drop, and that is a hideous color scheme. That's even worse. But hey, it's drag and drop. We can just get it, keep playing with it until we get it how we like it. And one of the things you can do is you can download this as a zip. It will generate that sort of base that you can build off of from this. Link to that. And then they have a basic one here. You can see the structure one. So you've got sort of a base set of CSS styles, and then you've got the ones that the theme generator builds, and then you might introduce additionally your own like application-specific style sheet that has icons and logos and style sheets or CSS sprite sheets that are specific to your app. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I must have missed this one.
Oh no, we didn't cover. Yeah. So I think we briefly touched upon this, but I think now it's probably more meaningful. This theme builder, it's a WYSIWYG drag and drop kind of tool, and you can share that link, and somebody else can look at what you've done. You can download a zip and then use those files within your app. So it's a really elegant kind of solution there. I noticed that Kendo UI had a similar theme builder going on in their app. So a nice trend to see of being able to at least get that base experience, that base layer right, and know that you're not going to have to redo that come next version. Or if you do, there's going to be some tooling to help at least get that level of it before you go and do the things that are very custom, that are going to be very unique to your app. So the next section is on dialogues and pop-ups. Pop-ups are very new. They're part of 1.2. 1.2 is actually not an official release yet. It's a release candidate. As you can kind of gather from the RC2 nomenclature here on the versions. It'll be due out. I mean, like release candidate 2, it'll be due out here any day now. And 1.2 adds pop-ups, among other things. The auto dividers features we saw. Prior to this, the only way you could do a dialogue, like a little pop-up window, was with a dialogue. The dialogues I found to be really clumsy. It was one of the first things I had to build and find a custom plugin to work around. The dialogues are essentially just like a page. So I create another div just like I would a page, but I give it a data role of dialogue. And when I go to link to it, I do a data rel dialogue. So I have a page, a content area, a link to a dialogue. This is a separate entity that can be referenced in multiple different pages. And when I click it, I'm going to get a complete transition away from what I was looking at to this, which is really jarring. This is where 1.2's pop-ups are pretty darn cool. The pop-ups are a little different. So we were just talking about how the dialogue was a separate entity. The pop-up is embedded within that entity. So now we have this content area. As a child of it, we define a pop-up. We just declare where it should be positioned. So by default, it's positioned sort of relative to where you clicked. I want to do it relative to the whole window. I've got some content here. I'm just going to show some text within it. Again, it's just a div that has a data role, in this case a pop-up. And very much like the dialogue one, I have this data rel, which tells it pop-up. I identify the particular pop-up by ID, And when I click it, I'm going to get a nice little window right there in the center.
What's the data rel's purpose?
The data rel is just sort of instructions for how that particular link should be treated for jQuery Mobile's perspective. So data rel page versus data rel dialog versus data rel pop-up. And so clicking that link, it treats it as if it was, A more interesting pop-up might be a menu one. So if we look here at the solutions, here we have a list view. We're well familiar with those now. Done a little styling on it to make sure it's going to stay within the width. Inline styling, I know that's not great. Then we have a data inset. We'll see that changes the appearance a little bit. It gives it sort of an inset look instead of it being flat, taking up the whole area. But when I click this, I'm going to get a list. You can imagine now, okay, well, I could put any of the form elements in there, or any of the things that we've covered so far could end up in that pop-up. It's pretty cool. Taking it a little further, we could put a photo in there. So here, we're used to that experience where when you click on a pop-up, you get a little close icon in the corner. The pop-up feature in jQuery Mobile actually does support that. As you can see here, what we've got is an icon, or a close button here. It's an anchor link that we're telling it is a backlink via this data rel. So it's another sort of instruction, how do I treat this link? And then it's a data rel button. We're theming it, we're giving it that delete icon. So you can see now, when I click this link, hey, there's one of those buttons. And when I click it, it acts as if a back button. In my pop-up, I didn't have any content in there except for just that image. But additionally, I could put this kind of close thing on any sort of container or any sort of content. I could put a video there. I could put a map there, which actually the next example is embedding an iframe that's referencing a map. So same thing as before. I've got a pop-up with a data role of pop-up. I've got a link in there for the close button that I want to have. It'll show up in the corner. And then I've got an iframe, and when I click that, I'm going to get a nice little map, Google Map, showing right where we are here in North Carolina. So pop-ups are very new. They're part of 1.2. But they do have all the utility of being able to use any of the components that you've learned throughout this. You can use the form elements, you can use those buttons, you can use lists, collapsible elements, all of that can be now within a form area that you can pop up over your view. Whereas dialogues, which were part of one on, would sort of replace the view. You again have transitions, which you use to kind of pop that up, push it. You can find all of those. In fact, we'll just jump ahead here to the resources. There's pretty extensive documentation and demonstrations here on the second link. Their entire documentation is actually done as a jQuery mobile app. So we can go in and we can see some of the more advanced topics that were covered today, such as what are the events that I could listen to from jQuery to do some JavaScript scripting around some of these. Like, how do I know when the page has been created or destroyed? How do I know when a user has clicked? So there's a number of really cool events that are provided as part of jQuery Mobile, including the tap and hold, swipe. So I can use jQuery syntax to use those selectors to find a particular element by its ID. I might have put a button or an image or somewhere within my UI that I then just use the normal jQuery selector to find that, and then add a listener, so on, swipe left, and now I can add some code that interacts when I swipe left. There are virtual mouse events. These sort of take the place of your normal click listeners. These, if you needed to know specifically, these sort of virtualized events that the reason they're called virtual is when you're not really clicking a mouse with your finger. So this kind of deals with that abstraction, or provides an abstraction above dealing with clicks versus touches. There are additional APIs, so if you're going to end up maybe loading page content on the fly, so right now we just find these pages as just a bunch of simple HTML, right? So if we add those elements to the page at runtime, they're just going to be those elements because the page is already rendered. You can see within the API here, there are ways to actually select that, and you can apply a refresh, or you can apply a page effect on that, and it will actually transform it. Again, very advanced topics, but the documentation for that can be found here on this site. And everybody wants to know more about it, feel free to ask questions, hit me up on it. There's an overall chart of all the data attributes that have been added. So you can see there are things like controlling shadows, position of icons, whether things are inline. So this is probably going to be your go-to reference sheet right here as you go to create your DOM elements for all the options that are available for those attributes, or for those tags rather. There are extensive examples of documentation for each of those major categories of things that we talked through today. Additionally, there's some configuration values that you can set up front to change some of the behavior, like disable Ajax, set a default transition that would be used for all pages, sort of global things like what the loading message should be. Whenever you do an Ajax load, it actually will do it'll automatically create a little loader thing there while that page is being retrieved. Some really cool stuff there. So there's the official website, there's the documentation and demonstrations, there's their Twitter feed, there are a number of external resources you could go to, a number of books on the topic. I mentioned before there were some custom themes that look like iOS. There's this iOS theme right here. So now if I click this, you see this looks an awful lot like iOS, although a bit dated. Doesn't look like iOS 5. So many resources, very popular framework, well supported, and I think you can kind of see at this point its utility, what it gives you, what it doesn't. It doesn't give you a full application development environment. It just gives you a really nice way to take the conventional HTML that you create and have that transformed into experiences that work well on the phone and on mobile devices. Did anybody have any questions or topics they wanted to discuss here? Sure.
I have a question on the switch for mobile device. Would you be looking for type of device or the width of the screen? What is your preference?
So there's a technical answer and a sort of philosophical answer to that. So one other thing we didn't cover is that there is a concept of grids within jQuery Mobile, where you can, for a content area, tell it an identifier, much like the themes A, B, C, and then you can define what that grid means and override that with CSS if you needed. That's sort of the technical answer. The philosophical question, I guess, this is something we were talking, I don't know if you were in the room, I think it was you who brought it up, maybe, yeah. We were talking about, we were talking about when we go to sites like this, particularly on our iPads, we often feel like we'd much rather go to the full site, and we're seeing a lot of research that backs that up. And most of the time, that boils down to two things. Most of the time it boils down to the fact that there's stuff the user wants to get to that they are used to finding in a certain area, and it's not there. They don't know this experience. They're used to using it on the desktop, so they want to find it physically in the place where they're used to finding it. And the other is that usually the budgets don't really allow for you to keep both these things in sync or to have the full parallel functionality. And users don't like to go to a tablet experience and find less than what they're used to experiencing, or not finding a feature that they're expecting to find. So I think, how do you detect that? that was a question that I kind of punted on. I don't have a good answer for that in that there are good JavaScript libraries for detecting capabilities and widths and screens. There are different frameworks. There are a lot of people trying to solve that problem. I don't think there's a single perfect answer, and it's going to vary based upon your particular problems. Yeah?
Well, that's sort of my question. If you were going to develop a new site
right.
and you wanted to work with everything, would you develop it just with something like jQuery mobile? Because it does function on the desktop.
It does, and I tried it.
Okay.
And people hated it. Yeah, I had a customer 2 years ago where they wanted to go that route. They wanted to try that. And they disliked the experience on the desktop. And obviously factors could have come into that maybe my design wasn't great for it. I don't know. I thought I had a nice sort of layout that was kind of iPad-esque that did scale down. So you had a nice sidebar area and a content area that stayed static and all that. And I think it just you're going to find it varies depending on the type of project and the type of interaction. If it feels clumsy, they're not going to like it. If it feels as if there's not enough, they're used to seeing more information. If they have a preconception, if they've used something prior and they expect it to work that way, you're going to have a hard time making that. If you're, like you're saying, if you're starting from scratch, it may well work. You're going to have to be sensitive to how your users respond to it.
I just going through their examples, I found very few that were sort of, like you said, the app is sort of a full experience that can do everything with it.
Right.
It's you kind of get a couple of pages, and then it's very quickly, I just want to go to the full site because this is at the end of that.
Right.
Isn't
And
that
so that's
the Stanford websites that you showed us are what he's saying, like Stanford and Disney and those other ones at the beginning. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like it's for it works the same on all desktop.
well, you'll notice that actually all of those were ones that started with like M dot, and so typically, you're looking at that point. You're looking at sites where they've done some sort of user agent detection and decided to route you to the mobile one versus the full one. And yeah, I think your question actually really hits it at the beginning, which is that if you have the opportunity to start from scratch, it could work to do a solution from the beginning and make that be the code base that you commit all your work to. What has happened on many of these is they had an existing experience, an existing site that people are used to working with in a certain way, and then they're trying to incrementally roll out a mobile solution. And you've got to be really careful about. I mean, there's contextual awareness. Like, what are the things I want to actually do in the context of my phone? I'm not really going to go in here and do very data intensive or a lot of data entry kind of work. But there are going to be things like if I don't have all the things that I am expecting to be able to do on the fly, I'm going to hate it. So, yeah.
One other thing my phone does is it lets me default whether I want to see the mobile site or the full site. So is there like a meta tag or something?
There must be. Yeah, I don't know the answer on that. Where's I'm actually kind of fascinated about it. Does anybody know the answer on that? Okay, well, yeah. So where are you able to set that?
In settings. It's a Windows phone.
Okay. So I wonder. I don't know if maybe it's as simple as them just making sort of the analysis that it's going M dot instead of www. That's sort of conventional thing,
I
or
haven't really thought about it until we were talking about it right now.
yeah.
I think it is like the UNC athletics site does that.
Does it?
Internal switch to say I always go to the.
Might be a cookie, but she's saying as that it's a phone level setting, she's able to do that. That's kind of because given the variety of solutions that people would apply, I wonder how that works. That's really cool. Plus, I want to see your phone. I've never seen a Windows phone in person. So.
I would look at it because I haven't been into that this weekend.
Yeah.
I was looking for a particular feature, and I'm wondering if you know, if Dr. Head of jQuery has it. Sometimes you go to a mobile site and there's a portion of it that's an image, and you can scroll through several.
A carousel?
Yes.
It's not part of the components that they provide. There may well be a third-party plugin that does that, and there's nothing to say you couldn't use an existing jQuery plugin in your page, you might have to add some additional event handlers for these special ones like the tap or the swipe. So you could potentially, put in that div. So maybe there's I'm sure there are dozens of normal jQuery plugins that you give it a set of list items, and it has each one an image, and then it goes and rewrites that and does a nice experience there. You could add listeners on that DOM element for a swipe, and then call whatever method tells it to advance or go back. So you'd have to probably enhance it a bit to make it work for touch interaction or swipes gestures particularly. But there's that whole suite of jQuery stuff that you already know or are able to leverage within this because it's built on the same core.
I really like the little thing you use in the presentation where you could enter the code and preview it.
Okay.
That was awesome.
Yes.
Is there a way I can have something like that that's running on my machine? I don't even know what that is. I've never seen that.
So the way, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here with the presentation. I was a little thrown off at the beginning trying to deal with this kind of view I've got going on here. I haven't had that experience before. But so the presentation is built using a open source presentation framework called Reveal.js, which I added a custom theme for Universal Mind onto that with some just a few lines of CSS. It's what gives us this nice CSS3 3D animation based thing that we've got going on here. And then I used something called Code Mirror, which is a JavaScript library that is a inline editor. And actually, if you go to the Sencha website and go to their docs, all of their docs that have the interactive things are actually done with Code Mirror. This is Code Mirror 2. It has a number of themes for color syntax highlighting. It's able to understand, like this one's initialized to understand mixed mode JavaScript and HTML. They've got little plugins for different languages, so it'll work with any of those. And then in terms of the preview, that's a custom thing I built on top of it that basically when you hit this preview button, I have a div that has an iframe in it. So I've got, anytime there's that event, I just ask the current slides code mirror, hey, what's your content? And then I put that into that iframe.
Okay.
So
when you, like, say you're developing a website in jQuery mobile
sure.
on your machine, how are you previewing it every time?
For that, I probably wouldn't use this particular solution.
Right.
I'd probably suggest checking out the Adobe, what's called Shadow, but now Edge Inspect. Okay. Adobe had a bunch of announcements last week, a whole suite of free stuff. So like there's the Creative Cloud thing. I guess they're just trying to get people to sign up there and get them a little closer to getting their credit card in there. And so one of the things they've done is there's a number of free offerings that are part of that, and Edge Inspect is one of those.
Okay.
Edge Inspect will actually let you have multiple devices out on your desk, and you can make a change and preview it simultaneously on all of them. So that would be, yeah. I think you use WebSockets to talk between them to tell each other. There's live reload, that kind of thing as well. But I mean, for one that actually works across multiple devices, check out Edge Inspect.
Just keeping that same theme, sort of off the subject here.
Sure.
Is there really any future for something like Sencha or Kendo UI, where they're charging for their developer tools? When in reality, we can get almost everything we want open source, and even if you're good and you actually donate money, you're still significantly less. I mean, that's why Adobe has gone.
It's a good question. That is a really good question. Because this question is like, what do I think the viability of these sort of commercial for-profit frameworks like Kendo UI and Sencha? And I think there's always going to be room for them. I think there's going to be that ecosystem between the two. I mean, the jQuery mobile is really interesting in that there's so much sponsorship of it, and there are people who are being paid, dedicated to work on open source. And that only happens on certain frameworks. Like AngularJS, Google's got like employees that they employ to do that work. And that's an interesting model, but the number of people involved there, does that scale to the needs of somebody who needs indemnification as part of their contract? Does it scale to the needs of someone who needs to be able to turn around support requests and have somebody and pay somebody, hey, please fix this, kind of things? I think there's going to be room for all of those. I'm still somewhat mystified as to what exactly the market forces were that totally pushed Flex off the cliff there, but I resigned myself to that even before it died, and was already looking. For my own startup, I decided I'm not going to do a Flex-based one. I'm going to try to use other technologies because these platforms have made Flex irrelevant. I don't know. I bet on Sencha in a big way on a couple projects. I've written a framework that sits on top of Sencha's framework, both Sencha Touch and XJS. It's called Deft.js. And it introduces inversion of control and an alternate model view controller implementation and promises and deferreds, just things that I thought were necessary for enterprise class apps that were missing in the framework. And it's MIT based. So here I am giving it away free, but they're making money on that framework. But given how complicated it is to make these abstractions that are going to work on all these different devices, especially as more and more and more of them emerge, that's not something you're going to get for free, and I think that there is some value in having a commercial entity who's accountable for it and who is charging money to actually, support that kind of effort. So I think we're going to see a continued parallel path. I think the paid stuff is clearly going to remain the province of enterprise. The people who, they're catering to people who are willing to pay, tens of thousands of dollars for a Sencha Complete license, that kind of thing. And you get a lot for that. When you think about how much a company like that, an enterprise company like that, charges or is charged by consulting firms to do a week's worth of work, what they get out of that purchase for a year's worth of support of that and that foundation to build upon, there's a good use case for it. So there's something to be said for paying for stuff. So I think both are going to continue to thrive. I don't know who's going to win. So I'm still having to kind of keep my hands in both worlds, like everybody else. My question, I guess, kind of positing back, is I'm wondering what's the future of the web? Like, what's the future of applications that are in that end of the spectrum, rather more specifically? So we're talking about that spectrum of like documents, interactive content, and apps. And the reason we started even doing apps in the browser was because at that time you had to do like an install of like 200 meg Novell and Oracle and all these things, and updating that process for that, there wasn't a good way to do that. And with the web, you just deployed a new version of that and they went to the page and they got it. Now we've got app stores that are pushing updates. What's going to, for complicated apps, for apps that have rich, detailed interaction, how many people are people going to continue to go and try to do things like we were doing with Flex, or are they going to go more towards native experiences again? Because there's actually going to be fewer platforms they have to target for that than trying to deal with a moving target of web standards that aren't equally implemented across all of those devices. So I don't know. What do you think of that?
I do app development on the web.
Yep.
And I've also written a ton of development tools in previous lives, and some of them did pretty well, and I see no market for that. I've actually written another one for me, because I don't like the way any of these frameworks work. Okay, but I tried for about a day and a half to see if I could convince anybody else it was worth anything, and everybody said no. And so I said, screw it, I'll just do it for me.
Well, it's an interesting scenario.
I love it because it's written for me.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as apps are concerned, I've got to tell you, I've written accounting apps and business apps in general. I'm doing an answering service app that is my main money maker right now, and I disagree. I think this trying to download the stuff to your phone is just as bad as downloading it to a PC and installing it and going that way. The future is the web.
Well, I wasn't taking a side on it. I'm just wondering how it's going to play out. I don't think it's a given.
I don't see it. You know, maybe playing Angry Birds or something. You know, but
tap into.
Yeah, you had
Well, like I'm kind of in the same quandary because I'm a big iPhone fan, but I want to do development, and I don't want to just develop something that only works on an iPhone. I don't want to throw away, my Objective-C code base. I got to go over here and work on an Android, Java base, or whatever. So, but how do you take a web HTML5 tap into native
Phone gap. Phone gap. Yeah, it's previously called Phone Gap. Adobe bought it. I think it's now Apache also. It's a Apache product called Cordova. But that would allow you to package up a web-based app and access native APIs, and you can even extend it with your own plugins. So yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Yeah, I'll keep it on the web. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. It's like
I think it's going to be interesting. I think the phones are going to have to give it more access. They're just going to have to. Apple would like.
Oh, well, thank you.
Great presentation.
By the way, I have to show you on Windows phones, it's not good for text. You just get a choice of whether you go to the desktop version all the time or a mobile version all the time.
Okay. Cool. Well, that'll be good.
I love it. I was an iPhone Android guy. Once I got my hands on a Windows phone, and I actually tweeted his presentation secrets.
Yeah, right. I was going to do that too. Yeah. That was very good.
Oh, thank you.
Just the process of using the other way.
I had to actually. Do you need your tweet your tools?
Oh.
Yeah. You don't install anything.
That's what I wanted to avoid.
And then
why don't you use the web?
So if something goes awry, you already know it's going to go awry.
Hey, sorry about that. Got enough time to set up, hopefully.
How's it going? Awesome.
If I just try to go to Stanford, it automatically goes to the mobile site. I try to go to the site for this,
Okay. Here's a USB stick I want to talk about. It's Windows. There's a Windows and a Mac version, so the Mac. So,
Okay.
We'll see.
Pass this around first.
Yeah.
As far as
Well, yeah.
phone gap SDKs.
Yeah. And Android development environment.
Yeah, I mean,
Let me write down what the.
I love this phone. I mean, and the Lumias, the Nokias, they're a little bit different.
So you recommend phone gap SDK?
Eclipse, the Android, but it's all in there. Okay. I'm about to go link it. How to make this slide? How do I make this? How do I switch over? So I automatically do it, or I need to do it?
Probably I'll go to preferences display.
No, I think it was early this year.
It's breaking. I don't know. Oh, it's this box. It's Cool. It's a button somewhere. Okay, buddy. Thanks, Ron. I don't have a. I thought it had a camera to see the device.
I'll hold it up.